Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's show. First, we're celebrating the return of two American astronauts after a grueling 9-month mission in space. Their safe return marks yet another milestone in America's dominance in space exploration. But when we talk about space heroes, it's not just the U.S. China has its own, too. Today, I want to share the story of Yang Liwei, China's first astronaut to travel to space. Humanity gazes at the universe like dust looking up at the stars. Behind infinite truths lies the relentless charge of the small into the unknown. The cosmos is our grandest vision of the future, and at the peak of human industrial civilization, space exploration stands as the ultimate test of a nation's technology, manpower, financial strength, and imagination. In 1957, humanity launched its first artificial satellite, Sputnik 1. In 1961, Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first person in space. In 1969, American astronaut Neil Armstrong set foot on the moon. To witness spaceflight is to witness the future. But for China 60 years ago, this all seemed like an impossible dream.
中国人搞导弹行不行？我那个时候正憋着一肚子气呢，中国人怎么不行啊？所以就回答很干脆，我说外国人能搞的，难道中国人不能搞？中国人比他们矮一截。
In the 1950s, China officially began exploring space. 14 years later, in 1970, China launched its first satellite, Dongfang Hong 1, breaking through the long winter of its space history. But among all space programs, manned spaceflight is the greatest challenge. Sending humans into space, that was a dream that had slept for 1,000 years. Yang Liwei is the most unforgettable spaceflight hero in China's memory. Whether in textbooks, news reports, or fading recollections, his name remains sharp and clear, etching into the minds of ordinary people their first impression of space. But how did he go from an ordinary person to a space hero? How did he fulfill the Chinese nation's dream of reaching space? And how did he answer the call of his time? In the 1960s, China's earliest manned spaceflight effort, the Shiguang-1 program, took shape. But due to national constraints, it inevitably ended in failure. After 2 decades of reflection and preparation, China waited for the right moment to rise again. In 1992, a massive secretive project was launched. One of its most crucial phases, the painstaking selection and training of China's first-generation astronauts, charged with fulfilling the Chinese dream of space travel. A special selection team combed through the ranks of active military pilots, screening for height, weight, age, education, and more. From over 1,500 candidates, the pool shrank to 886, then 90, then 60. Among them was a top-tier pilot, Yang Liwei. By the late 20th century, China's economy was booming. Many military pilots were transferring to civilian aviation, securing lucrative salaries and stable careers. But not Yang Liwei. Growing up near an airfield, his dream had always been to become an ace pilot. He couldn't bear to take off the uniform. Logging 1,350 hours of flight time, he had flown across nearly every corner of China. That unwavering dedication led him to this once-in-a-lifetime selection. Being an astronaut was an entirely new profession in China, and it came with strict physical demands. The selection process, designed by the Institute of Space Medicine Engineering, was unlike anything Yang Liwei had ever encountered. He once said, "Even the best fighter pilot doesn't automatically qualify as an astronaut. The gap isn't just between the ground and space, it's about pushing beyond the limits of human endurance." By the end of 1997, 14 finalists moved into the astronaut training facility. Armed guards were stationed outside their dorms. No outsiders were allowed in. These 14 men became the most secretive, most unreachable figures in China at the time.
那么我们来到这儿之后呢，所有的管理教育都是相对都是独立的因为航天我们有很多规定比如说不能随意外出不能在外随意就餐然后我们的管理是全封闭式的。
Strict discipline was the foundation of astronaut training. Inside the cramped spacecraft, thick, heavy spacesuits left them drenched in sweat. These were the most expensive, most complex suits on Earth. Just a single glove required over 500 intricate steps to manufacture. But two challenges couldn't be solved by technology alone: G-forces and weightlessness. To escape Earth's gravity, a spacecraft must reach orbital velocity, which inevitably subjects astronauts to extreme G-forces, like riding the world's most brutal roller coaster. Typically, this force ranges from 2 to 3 Gs. But astronaut centrifuge training? That goes up to 8 Gs, 8 to 10 times their body weight crushing down on them. At its worst, this pressure makes breathing nearly impossible, causes blackouts, and even risks fatal consequences. An astronaut's superhuman endurance comes from relentless, brutal training. Strapped inside an 8-meter-long rotating arm, lying half reclined inside a metal tube, they were spun at 100 kilometers per hour. Their chests and backs crushed under hundreds of pounds of force. Heart rates skyrocketed. Within just 40 seconds, all their strength was drained. If it became unbearable, they could hit an emergency button to stop. Yang Liwei? He never pressed it, not even once. To many, zero gravity seems poetic, objects floating freely, as if by magic. But in space, weightlessness causes bodily fluids to rush to the head, creating an intense feeling of being upside down. Overcoming this is essential for survival. Simulating weightlessness on Earth was nearly impossible. At the time, China lacked the technology to do it domestically, so training had to take place at Russia's Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center. It was far away. It was expensive. So every moment of training had to count. A massive jet would climb to 10,000 meters, then dive along a parabolic trajectory, briefly creating a zero-gravity environment. Under these conditions, astronauts had to practice eating, drinking, and completing high-precision tasks, an essential prerequisite for surviving in space. These grueling exercises? Just the tip of the iceberg. Over 5 years, the 14 astronauts had to master 58 specialized courses. Their complexity rivaled that of any top university in the world. They called these lessons the ladder to the heavens. Every step up was excruciating, but also exhilarating. And at the top of that ladder, the gateway to spaceflight. Yang Liwei once said, "No one enjoys experiencing danger, pain, or suffering. But as astronauts, we endure them because the mission demands it. The profession demands it. The duty demands it. It's not about personal preference. And when you finally achieve your goal, the pain transforms into joy." In October 2002, China's central leadership convened a meeting, approving the nation's first manned spaceflight for 2003. The objective? 1 astronaut, 1 full day in orbit. Just 9 words marking the final chapter of 5 years of intense training. A clear goal meant fierce competition. Only 3 astronauts would make the final flight team. Among the 14 trainees, this would be the toughest exam in all of China. At a critical moment in his training, Yang Liwei faced his biggest personal challenge, one that almost cost him his chance to fly. In late 2001, his wife, Yu Mei, was diagnosed with a kidney condition. At the same time, their 5-year-old son needed care. For Yang Liwei, family was everything. During his wife's hospitalization, he took care of their son every night, cooking, helping with homework, putting him to bed. Only after 10 p.m. did he begin his own studies. At dawn, he'd take his son to school before heading to base for training. It was exhausting, but manageable, until out-of-town training began. Not wanting to disrupt her husband's work, his wife would go to the hospital for IV treatments in the morning, then ride back home with the IV bag still in her hand, balancing medical treatment with taking care of the family. There was no other way. His superiors were concerned, but Yang Liwei responded with unwavering focus. He never missed a single training session, and his performance remained at the top. The year 2003 arrived, a year no Chinese citizen would forget. The SARS epidemic spread across the country. Astronauts were placed under strict quarantine. For over 100 days, they couldn't see their families. Despite the crisis, the mission plan remained unchanged. In mid-May, final evaluations began. The last graduation exam was incredibly difficult. Everyone's scores were outstanding. The gap between first and last place? Sometimes just 1 or 2 points, sometimes even tenths of a point. In the grueling round-robin exams, Yang Liwei repeatedly scored above 99. His overall ranking never slipped from first place. 5 years and 6 months, the golden years of a man's prime. Over 2,000 days and nights of relentless training, culminating in one undeniable result. All 14 astronauts were now fully qualified to conduct independent space missions. China had become the third country, after Russia and the US, capable of training its own astronauts. After a final vote by the selection committee, 3 astronauts were chosen for the first flight team. Zhai Zhigang ranked second, Nie Haisheng ranked third, and Yang Liwei.
杨利伟最终入选首飞梯队。
首长放心，我们有能力、有信心，一定能够完成任务。
首长您放心，我们3个人无论是谁去执行任务，都会全神贯注地去完成好这次任务。在这里，我向首长保证，坚决完成任务。
作为首长的表态，我有这个决心，有这个信心，能够完成好这个任务。
和平利用太空。 造福全人类 ，make use the outer space peacefully and benefit of humankind.
The atmosphere seemed lighthearted, but all 3 knew what was coming. One of them would be the first. By October 14th, one day before launch, the decision had already been made. 11 senior officials cast their votes. Unanimously, they chose Yang Liwei as China's first astronaut. At 4 p.m., a debate broke out. Some argued he should be told immediately to put all 3 astronauts at ease. Others worried he'd be too excited to sleep, jeopardizing the mission. In the end, they agreed. If an astronaut couldn't handle this news, how could he handle a spaceflight? At 7 p.m., Yang Liwei received the official notice in his room. For a brief moment, a wave of emotion surged inside him. Then he calmed down. This was perhaps the simplest test of all. That night, he didn't lose sleep. In fact, he slept soundly. The team doctor had to knock twice to wake him up. After a routine medical checkup, the 3 astronauts put on their thick overcoats and went to breakfast. Yang Liwei had a glass of mineral water. Zhai Zhigang and Nie Haisheng raised their glasses of red wine for a toast. On Nie Haisheng's wrist was Yang Liwei's watch, a token entrusted to him the night before. Life and death, an unspoken topic among astronauts. 2003 was a year of tragedies in the space industry. In February, the U.S. Space Shuttle Columbia disintegrated upon re-entry, killing all 7 astronauts. In August, a Brazilian rocket exploded on the launch pad, claiming 21 lives. Yang Liwei was fully aware of the extreme risks of spaceflight, but he never doubted his return. He trusted his country, but he was also prepared for the ultimate sacrifice. To him, piloting a spacecraft felt as natural as an ordinary person riding a bicycle. In his autobiography, Yang Liwei wrote, "Standing in front of the transport vehicle, Zhai Zhigang, Nie Haisheng, and I said our goodbyes. We weren't supposed to hug, but we couldn't help it. As we embraced, they whispered in my ear, 'Liwei, see you in Beijing tomorrow.'"
飞行任务准备完毕，待命出征。请指示中国人民解放军航天员大队航天员杨利伟出发。是。
This mission belonged to one man alone, but no matter who it was, he was just the executor. He carried the dreams of 14 astronauts and the aspirations of 1.4 billion Chinese people. Behind him, countless hands had lifted him up. Countless minds had paved the way. Huang Weifan, a key trainer for the astronaut program, once said, "We all know the name Yuri Gagarin, but who remembers the people who trained him? We are the nameless heroes." Amid waves of blessings, Yang Liwei boarded Shenzhou 5. At 6:15 a.m., he strapped into his custom-fitted seat. 50 meters above the ground, the rocket stood fueled, loaded with 430 tons of propellant, a giant bomb ready to launch a single man into space. A veteran astronaut once described it this way: "I'm just a man sitting on top of a bomb, waiting for it to explode me into the sky." At the Jiuquan Satellite Launch Center, Shenzhou 5 stood tall against the morning light, like a towering sword, pointed toward the vastness of space.
4、3、2、1，
上午9时整，神舟5号载着航天员杨利伟开始了万众瞩目的太空之旅。
erupted from the rocket's base. Thousands of tons of water instantly vaporized into steam. The desert trembled. The sky roared. Yang Liwei clenched his entire body. Every muscle tensed. He felt as solid as iron. The rocket accelerated. The pressure mounted. Everything was going smoothly. Until an unexpected phenomenon occurred. At around 30 to 40 kilometers in altitude, the spacecraft began vibrating violently. Resonance, a phenomenon impossible to predict. The shaking was unbearable. His insides felt like they were being torn apart. For a moment, he thought he wouldn't survive. For 26 agonizing seconds, the resonance persisted. Then suddenly, it vanished. On the ground, Mission Control saw the live feed flicker. Then it stabilized. Scientists, witnessing the moment, burst into tears. Weightlessness arrived in an instant. The dust inside the cabin suddenly lifted, as if everything inside had sprouted wings. At that moment, Yang Liwei knew. He had officially entered the vastness of space. Unfastening his harness, he floated to the window. The view outside, unlike anything he had ever seen. Earth, suspended in the darkness of space, was breathtaking beyond comparison. Shimmering blue lakes sparkled against the black void. As he took in the view, he felt a profound realization. The true meaning of humanity, of nation, of civilization. He picked up a space pen and wrote down a single line. That day, Shenzhou 5 orbited Earth 14 times. 14 sunrises, 14 sunsets. The sun didn't rise gently. It exploded into view like a fireball. And when it set, it plunged violently below the horizon. An awe-inspiring, impossible sight. During the mission, Yang Liwei was given 2 scheduled sleep periods, totaling 6 hours. He slept for just 30 minutes. As China's first astronaut to pull an all-nighter in space, he had no time to rest. There were procedures to follow, reports to send, operations to execute. Every step meticulous. He even found time for a meal. Mooncakes, biscuits, braised pork, 8 treasure rice, and pickled vegetables. He spoke to his family over the radio, and at one point he encountered a sudden flash of light and a mysterious knocking sound. This first manned spaceflight was mostly an experimental mission. Yet every single action Yang Liwei took, big or small, carried immense scientific and symbolic significance. For a full year after his return, he answered hundreds of questions from researchers. Shenzhou 6 incorporated 180 improvements based on what he experienced, including fixing the terrifying 26-second resonance and redesigning the microphone that cut his lip upon landing. That day, he and the countless people behind the mission stood at the turning point of history, steering a nation's space program toward the future. As the morning light rose once again, a new day began. The re-entry capsule landed safely. Yang Liwei stepped out, completing China's first human spaceflight. By 2022, 19 years had passed. The 14 astronauts from that first training class, they didn't fade into history. They pushed forward. They achieved more. They kept writing new chapters in China's space legacy. During a Chinese New Year celebration, Yang Liwei sat among the audience, watching the festivities. His former comrades, now aboard China's space station, sent their greetings from orbit. "Happy New Year! We send our blessings from the Tiangong space station." The history of spaceflight was once filled with blanks and hardships. But today, space no longer feels distant or mysterious. We stand at the crossroads of human civilization, not only looking up at the stars, but also looking back at Earth, bringing stories from the depths of space, bringing back a spirit of exploration, illuminating the future, preserving the memory of the first dawn we ever saw on this beautiful blue planet.
我感觉非常良好，我们的飞船非常正常，我为祖国感到骄傲。
舱内的生活和工作环境很好，现在我们感觉到身体状况不错。